And by the way, this meeting is being recorded. Hope that's okay with all of you. Continue if you want to be there. My name's Jeremy. I'm with Upright Consulting. We partner closely with Greenlink to bring all of you GEM, the Greenlink equity map, and community of practice. If it's your first time here, welcome here. If you're coming back, great to have you back. Just as a little overview, this community of practice is a place where those of us who are working on climate equity issues and using data and maps to help advance that work can come and share with each other a little bit about what we're doing, how it's working, what our strategies are, what our pain points are, right? This is meant to be a supportive community of practice. We meet monthly in this big group, and we generally have two types of approaches to the work, to the way that we organize ourselves in these monthly sessions. Sometimes we have presentations with Q&A, so there's some learning and crosstalk and discussion. We do that regularly. And the other thing we do is a little bit of peer consulting, where members of the community get to come and they get to share a little bit about what they're doing, and then they get to ask some questions of all of you. And you get to give them some advice or some insights or some resources that you're aware of. And we're going to be doing a little bit of each one of those today in the course of our agenda. We're really excited today because those of you that have been with us for a while know that Mina, Tului, and I, along with the core group of partners, have been kind of putting together and running this community of practice. But we're so thrilled to welcome Diamond Spratling to the team, who is the GEM community of practice program manager or project manager, who's going to be with us. And so you get to meet her today and hear about some of the work that she's done before joining up with this team just recently. And we're also going to hear from Brian Clark in the sustainability office in Columbus, Ohio, about some of the work they're doing around data and maps, and a couple of questions that he has for all of you that you might be able to help him with. So that's kind of a rough overview of our agenda today. We're really glad to have you with us. Once again, if you don't mind renaming yourself with your city or organization so we can kind of see who's in the chat and get to know each other, or in the call and get to know each other, that would be great. Any questions anybody has? Before I turn it over to Diamond. Any questions? You in the right meeting? Everybody's here? All right, great. Well, it's really good to have you here. Thanks for being with us, and thanks for sharing a little bit in the chat about what brought you here. And I see some hellos and connections to some of your friends and colleagues. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Diamond Spratling to introduce herself and some of the work that she's done before. Diamond, we're so thrilled to have you with us, and I'm glad that it's been so great to get to know you over the past couple of weeks since you come on board. I'm glad you have this chance to get to know some of the members of our broader community. I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for the really amazing introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Diamond Spratling, and I am super excited to introduce myself and also introduce some of the really great work that I've had the opportunity to do. So I'm probably going to take the next 10-15 minutes to introduce actually the Parks and Recreation Equity Data Tool, which is a decision-making tool for prioritizing parks, recreation centers, and neighborhoods with the greatest need across Atlanta. But before I do so, since I am new to the Greenlink team, I did want to give a little bit more background and introduction of myself. So as Jeremy said, I am the GEM project manager and community of practice project manager for Greenlink Analytics. Super excited to be joining in on the team and facilitating this role, especially as making sure that we're expanding out GEM and also our amazing our core group and community of practice. So prior to actually starting at Greenlink, I was with Bloomberg Associates as their Health Equity and GIS Fellow, which actually is the reason why I'm able to present on this Parks and Recreation Equity Data Tool. So I've had a really great space with that and actually creating the City of Atlanta's very first Parks and Recreation Equity Data Tool to kind of drive decision-making in the future. I also have experience with CDC, being there for about 2 years in their heart disease and stroke prevention team in all things policy and research translation. I'm an Emory Fellow, or I'm an Emory alumni. I was with Emory for getting my MPH, also at Bowling Green State University, which is in Ohio. I'm interested in all things environmental justice, public health equity, urban planning, sustainability, and more. And I am based here in Atlanta, but I am originally from Michigan. All right, so I do want to get back to the Parks and Recreation Equity Data Tool. So it actually evaluates parks, rec centers, and community need across Atlanta so that the Department of Parks and Recreation, also known as DPR, can actually prioritize park and rec center investment and capital improvement based on neighborhoods with the greatest need. The goal also is for the tool to actually serve as a tracking system over time to monitor how DPR's efforts has positively impacted Atlanta's parks, and of course, the amazing people who use the parks now more than ever, given COVID. So as a result of the tool, DPR is actually able to make data-driven decisions to determine which parks and recreation centers to prioritize for future funding and investments. And so this in return, we really hope that the city can move closer to the goal of building equity across Atlanta, especially because Mayor Bottoms has recently come out about how important it is to achieve equity for the city. Secondly, DPR will be able to track baseline data for all the metrics that we did using the tool over time. So at the baseline, but again, in 5 years and in 10 years to really make sure that DPR is actually impacting the neighborhoods that they're invested in. And then in addition to that, also being able to more easily connect the DPR efforts to health equity and to life expectancy, because we've actually incorporated health and life expectancy indicators into the map, because Commissioner Dargo, which is the City of Atlanta's park commissioner, really made it clear that he wanted to be more dedicated to the idea of physical activity and parks being closely related to health and health equity. And so I do want to spend a little bit more extra time on this slide just to maybe highlight the progress and the process that we did go through. And so the first thing that I really wanted to make sure that I did was go through and do a scan of city park equity plans to better understand what other cities are doing, what other cities are not doing, what's working, what's not working, what indicators they decide to use to really help us decide what exact methodology and indicators we wanted to look at our plan. We wanted to make sure it was as conclusive as possible and incorporated literally anything that we could for the data tool. In addition to that, I've met with several different park and health experts, some colleagues over at CDC that do a lot with physical activity and health in parks, plenty of different commissioners across the country who do parks as well, but also getting on the ground and meeting with different community members to see what exactly they thought were the biggest indicators and things that we should be tracking as far as access to parks and also having good quality parks across the city of Atlanta. So we met with great experts over at Wawa, which is based in Atlanta, who has been able to help tell us what type of indicators we're missing as far as redlining, gentrification, things like that. But also, for those of you who don't know, the city of Atlanta just hired their chief equity officer, Kadira, who was also able to weigh in what she thought were really great indicators as far as actually achieving equity. We also met with the chief health officer of Atlanta too, Angelica Jeter, to make sure that we were incorporating all the different health pieces within the data tool too. So this was really our big effort of making sure that we were checking in on the community. And we also did a lot of public input surveys, public input meetings, and things like that across the city of Atlanta to make sure that everyone's kind of voices were heard throughout the city. And then with all of that buy-in, we were able to actually finally come up with a list of different indicators, which I'm happy to go into later in the presentation. And then we were able to develop a methodology, do the analysis, create the actual maps, which we did through ArcGIS, visualize them, and then create the actual data tool. And then this slide is just talking about just really the commitment that the city has as far as equity. So the city mayor, Mayor Bottoms, actually talks about wanting to make sure that everyone across the city of Atlanta has a safe 10-minute walk to a park. So we thought that this data tool could definitely help to enrich that, to make sure that we have that initiative and see it through by incorporating certain indicators as far as safety and crime and different things like that on the neighborhood level. And then just to talk a little bit about the methodology, just because we get a lot of questions about what exactly is included in the tool and what we did. So we have different geographic levels for the tool. So there's the park level, the recreation center level, the census tract level, which is something that more people are more familiar with, and also the maintenance district level. And that is like the northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest levels of City of Atlanta. And so we've looked at tons of different pieces of data, which I'll go through at all three of these different geographic levels. So at the park and recreation center level, so this actually, the data that we use for here came from two different data sets. So the City of Atlanta staff actually went out to, and for those of you who don't know, Atlanta has over 400 different parks, so tons of green space here. And so they actually went out to all of those parks last summer and evaluated them all the way. And so we were able to take from those park evaluations and actually use some of that data for our analysis to include in the data tool. So that's what those different bullet points that you'll see here. But we also were able to collect funding data, and this was private data, private funding and public funding that all the parks have received over the past 5 years. So that was something that's very important, especially when you talk about under-resourced and what parks have traditionally not been invested in financially. People wanted to be able to see that data to help for prioritization. And then we did the same thing for recreation centers as well. They went out and evaluated all 28 recreation centers that were active in the City of Atlanta, and were able to collect that data and include it into the data tool. And the same thing for the historic funding as well. And then on the census tract level, so this is something that people are more so familiar with. So on the census tract level, we've been able to actually have 5 different categories. So demographics, safety, mobility and transportation access, physical environment, and social and economic factors. And so this was a section where community members and health and park experts really were able to weigh into what do you want to see in a type of tool like this. And so within those 5 categories, we had 10 different indicators that I came up with in order to include in our community needs score of the data tool. And so within those 10 different indicators, we have tons of different pieces of data. I think it adds up to about 25 different pieces of data that we were able to include. Most of them come from census data and other different amazing data sources too that are all publicly available, so that you're able to see what the breakdown is as far as vulnerable housing conditions, environmental health, food environments, transportation, all different type of things that we thought were very critical as far as access to parks, where the parks were, who has a safe walk to a park, or just what the demographics or the characteristics look like outside of the parks as well. So moving on to our levels of service score. So level of service is more so something that the urban planners and the park people look at. And so level of service actually gets at who has access to the park. So what they do is they do an analysis between the amount of green space per census tract and the total population, because there should be a certain amount of green space per number of people in each area, for example. So that's level of access, but acreage level is something that they also look at, and that is just the total number or amount of green space acreage within each census tract. So that's something that we were able to collect and have by census tract as well, as far as looking at just access to green space in general. And then moving on to just the final level, that's our maintenance level. And so here on this level, we collected 2 different pieces of data, and one is our maintenance funding. So just figuring out where the funding has gone by maintenance district. This has been very important, especially for city councilmen and different things like that. We actually did a few presentations at MPUs and CDHS meetings, and also with Councilman Westmoreland, to just get buy-in and thoughts about maintenance funding, because that's very important for people, especially in the policy space, but also looking at community perception. So what we did was we disseminated our surveys to Atlanta residents, and we got back about 1,300 of those survey responses to kind of figure out, what do Atlantans actually think about their parks? What's holding them back from actually visiting their parks? What can we do to improve the community perspectives? And so with that, we were able to take some of that data and include it into the data tool as well. So this last slide is just getting into the scoring methodology of the tool, which we do get a lot of questions about that. And so in both of these charts, you'll see that this is the same breakdown of all the different categories of data that we collected in the indicators. And so we've scored them out to both for the parks and recreation centers to equal out to a total score of 300. But one of the important things to note is that the higher the score is, that's indicating that there is a great need to prioritize that park, that recreation center, and that community that it surrounds. So usually we associate high numbers with being a higher or better outcome, but in this case, we're addressing need and evaluating needs. So therefore a high score of 300 or close to 300 indicates that there's a high need to prioritize that neighborhood. And then lastly, over here, just talking about the health indicators, because the commissioner did want to make sure that we were really honing in on this relationship between parks and health. And so we did include tons of different health outcome and health behavior data that came mostly from the CDC 500 Cities study, where we were able to get on a census tract level to see what these different health outcomes look like across the city of Atlanta. And with that, I'd love to take just 2 minutes to show you the data tool really quickly, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions. Give me 1 second while I stop share and reshare. Okay, perfect. So I'm hoping you all can all see my screen. But this is the Parks and Recreation Equity Data Tool. Just to note, it's still in work in progress. It has not been live yet. The City of Atlanta loves press releases, so we're doing a big press release at the end of the summer, but also making sure that we're incorporating and embedding it into the actual live Activate ATL website, and then making it as user-friendly as possible, which is an ongoing effort. But this is the data tool at first glance. We actually have all 7 of the maps here in this data tool, where we were able to expand the maps and explore them and see exactly how each of the parks differ, how the recreation centers differ, and what the differences are based on the census tract. We can see a list of the parks that have received the absolute highest park needs score, and the recreation centers that have received the highest park needs score as well. And I'll actually go through and give you just a quick example. A lot of people like to see what's going on at Atlanta's flagship park. And for those of you who don't know, that is Piedmont Park, and that is a really huge park across the city of Atlanta that traditionally does very, very well. And so as you can see, all these same 5 indicators that we looked at in the presentation, they're mostly in green because this park is highly invested in. This area is doing pretty well. So that is the Piedmont Park example, but there are tons of other parks that we see here across Atlanta, mostly in the outer skirts areas where they're not, as for example, have such a great outcome. So for example, if we look over here, this is over in the East Point area or the East Atlanta area at Brownwood Park, and we can see that we're seeing more red here as far as their park conditions. So we can see that they can be improved as far as the actual park level of service, as far as access to park. That's something that can definitely be improved in that area too. Maintenance funding, they haven't traditionally received much maintenance funding in this area as well. So that's just one of the very many things that you can do with the data tool. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I know this is a very high level, just very quick overview of the data tool, but again, happy to answer any questions or any comments.
Thank you so much, Diamond. That is so impressive. You can see why we're thrilled to have Diamond here on the team. Divya, you had a question in the chat. Can you come off mute and just voice that a little bit? We'll get a little dialogue going in the Q&A.
Sure. Diamond, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Super exciting to sort of see that. Does this tool take into account, is there a minimum size of park that you consider, or you're taking anything that is considered a park, and do you have like a definition for that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So actually for the city of Atlanta, just as I said, like over 400 parks they have, but they include literally almost any type of green space to be considered a park. For example, it could be a median. But as far as what we did for our analysis, we did not include all of those very small, like if you see a median in your neighborhood, for example, between the streets, we did not include that. So we included like play lots, the big flagship recreational parks, the neighborhood parks, and just the bigger parks, but also the ones that are on the community level, neighborhood level as well. So pretty much we've included over 300 of of Atlanta's parks within the analysis that we created.
That's beautiful. Just one last thing. Does it also take into account private parks that are managed, I mean, that have public access?
That's a great question too. So because it is the city of Atlanta and they manage only the public parks, they've only included the public parks for this exact study. And same with the recreation centers. For example, there's other rec centers within Atlanta, but they, for example, have like put given management to private funders, for example. So it only includes the parks that are publicly available that are publicly accessed by City of Atlanta.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Any other questions? Group about Diamond's background or about the work in, yeah, Julia, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It was really interesting. I was just wondering if there was any data that you found particularly surprising. And I was wondering this just because in the example, I think it was Brownwood Park, correct me if I'm wrong. I noticed that some of the maintenance scores were very high, but there was one score that was quite green. And I think that was public perception. So it sounds like even though maybe it's not the most well-kept park, people still really enjoy going there. And I was just curious if there was any kind of data like that you found surprising, or if that wasn't surprising to you.
Yeah, another great question. So as far as the community perception, so community perception was divided into the 4 quadrants. So as I said, there were 1,300 different survey questions that we got and answered. And so imagine dividing that just into 4. So that was more so of an average. So if you divide that by 4, you can see that pretty much across the city of Atlanta, there weren't many differences at all in community perception. It seemed like they all kind of had the same opinions as far as the city of Atlanta's parks, for example. But another thing that we did find very surprising was the level of service, for example. So Buckhead area of Atlanta, which is located in northwest side of Atlanta, they talk a lot about not having access to parks. And we're like, you have all these great green states, but if you really look at what the data says, level of service, they really don't have much access to green space as we do in the city, especially with all the different tiny parks that we have right in the city of Atlanta versus being in a more suburban area. So that was something that was pretty surprising for us, I will say.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, Emily, yeah, please ask your question, and then we'll that'll be the last question for now. But if folks have other ones, you're welcome to throw them in the chat, and Diamond will get back to you. But we want to move and hear a little bit from Columbus in just a little bit, and see if we can help Brian out with a couple questions he has. Emily, go ahead, come off and mute.
Thanks. Hopefully this is quick. Yeah, I think you touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering about the partners that work together to get the data and then kind of complete the project, and maybe secondarily some of the skill sets on the team. This seems a little bit out of my realm, but I'm just wondering who else you partnered with, or I would love to have someone like you on our staff, but alas.
Yeah, thanks so much, Emily, for your question. I'll be quick. So basically, this project happened when I was actually working for Bloomberg Associates, and our client was the City of Atlanta's Department of Parks and Recreation. And so I was actually hired on to do this entire project from A to Z. So that was my role. But of course, we have to think about sustainability and things like that, and making sure the city has a capacity to maintain it. And so right now, I'm in the end stages of actually transitioning over everything to the City of Atlanta. They've committed to hiring a data person because they've seen how important it is to use evidence for their decision making. But also I've been training their staff so that they can have the GIS expertise and the knowledge and capacity to be able to continue to use the tool even after my completion of the project. So that's been a really great task, but making sure that we're able to transition everything over to DPR so that they have the capacity.
That's great, thanks.
Well, thanks again, Diamond. It's so great to have you on the team, and thanks for sharing a little bit about the work you've done before in Atlanta. This is super interesting, and we'll talk at the end of this call about upcoming calls we have for this community, which will dive even deeper into some of these issues around health equity and layering different indicators together to create an index. So we'll talk more about that. And again, it's so great to have you here. Let's see, I'm going to turn it over to Mina at Upright, who's going to introduce Brian and kind of lead us through this next session of learning a little bit about the work in Columbus and seeing if we can be helpful with a couple questions. Thanks, Mina. Thanks, Brian, for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Diamond and everybody. I'm just going to introduce Brian Clark, who leads up the sustainability for the city of Columbus. Maybe Brian, you can elaborate on your title when I introduce you. But so what we're going to do is he's going to talk about energy burden mapping and their work around trying to use equity data to plan for equitable energy efficiency programs. So I'll turn it over to him. And then after he shares, we're going to open it up to have him pose, or we will pose a couple of questions that he has for the group. And the reason that we're opening it up in this way, the reason that we're kind of posing questions to the group is in this community of practice, right? It's a space of practice. It's a space of the supportive space. And what we're trying to do is really socialize this and kind of make normal this process of asking our peers for help and being able to say, I don't know, being able to say, you know, I'm struggling with this because again, this work around equity, using data and maps, it's an emerging practice and there's a lot that we can learn from each other. And so we're opening up the questions at the end for that reason. So please kind of keep in mind ways that you might be able to support Brian in this context. So I'll hand it over and thanks, Brian.
Wonderful, thank you. So let me see if I can figure out screen sharing again. It worked earlier, so hopefully it will work again. All right, there we go. So I'm Brian Clark, work for the City of Columbus, been with the city for about 10 years in various different capacities. And I want to talk a little bit about our journey from sort of an old school approach to data to some, I think, better embedding equity in the questions we ask and the data we use. I'll say from the start that I'm not a data expert. I would pay double what you're paying for Diamond. So Diamond, just let me know if you want to come to Columbus, Ohio. Those are the types of folks that I love to see working in the space. I am not one of those people. So, you know, I want to talk a little bit about Columbus, our history with data mapping. And, you know, like a lot of you, we've been using GIS and map visualization for about 30 years now. We've used it, we say, to inform policy. I think we've used it, frankly, more to explain public policy. But I think a pretty standard experience there in the mapping. But in 2017, when I was working in the mayor's office as head of policy citywide for the city of Columbus, we had a spike in homicides. It was a spike that no one saw coming. And it was a spike that was truly alarming across the city. And as we looked at grappling with that and thinking about what we would do to respond to the spike in homicides, it really kind of set us on a different course about the way we think about data. And that has had, I think, some pretty great implications for our sustainability work. So I'm going to do some sharing of what are going to look, frankly, pretty crappy looking maps, because I try to take the real thing from, you know, the time that we used it. So what you see here is just a plot of all the homicides that happened in 2017. That was about the extent of the way that we thought about data when it came to public safety, when we went into the end of 17, beginning of 18. We thought about, you know, where the murders were happening, and we sent additional police presence to address it. We missed out on a lot of things. Where were the victims actually from? Where were the perpetrators from? What was the context of the community where, you know, we were approaching public safety? So we began by looking at opportunity neighborhoods of opportunity is what we called them then, where we could look at more intensive interventions. And we started with some pretty basic safety data. We looked at violent crime, we looked at drug overdoses, and we looked at vacant housing. But we weren't satisfied with the fact that we were only looking at traditional safety data. So we started looking at things like 311 requests. We frankly got a lot of pushback internally because this was self-selected, it wasn't rigid enough data, it wasn't quantitative enough for data, but we mapped it anyway. And we began to see trends emerge. We began to see trends in terms of here's the illegal dumping mapping that we had in the city of Columbus. Here's the mapping for infant mortality in the city of Columbus. We're seeing those same hotspots emerging. Here's the mapping for urban tree canopy. Again, generally the same hotspots emerging. Then we go to, this is lead service line mapping in the city of Columbus. It's a little deceiving because it doesn't really give you the intensity of the presence of those lead service lines, but if you dig into the data, again, you're seeing the exact same experience. It is an area that is roughly east-west across the city, which is Highway 70, and then an area that is north-south, which is Highway 71. We shouldn't have been surprised about what we were seeing in this data. This is a plot of the racial segregation, frankly, of the city of Columbus. Again, you'll see red, high population of Black youth, blue, high population of white youth. And those population trends tend to follow where the highways were built and where we've had other traditional policies in the city. Same for opportunity mapping that we looked at. The darker the color, the greater the opportunity in that area. And we find that opportunity is really clustered in predominantly white areas of Columbus. So then we looked at something that if you haven't looked at before for your city, I highly recommend that you do. And that's the original redlining map for the city of Columbus. And we saw again those same clusters in the same areas where the darker areas were the redlined housing and development for the city of Columbus. And that's a lot of maps. What did it tell us, and why? What does this have to do with sustainability? What we learned was that we were looking at data in silos. We looked at lead data, and that was it. We weren't thinking about the context of that. We looked at infant mortality, and that was it. We weren't thinking about the context. And we had lost connection with our own history as a city. The same racial segregation that existed in the 50s persists today. As we began taking that step back, thinking about, what's different, we also looked at some of the stuff that we had done in sustainability. So I'm going to tell on ourselves a little bit here. Right here is a screenshot of our 2016 climate change plan for the city of Columbus. Did a keyword search in our own document, and keyword search for the word justice. It doesn't appear in the document anywhere. Black and brown people doesn't show up. BIPOC communities doesn't show up. Marginalized communities. None of those things are discussed at all in that document. The document's only 4.5 years old. Then we looked at our climate adaptation plan. We completed that in December 2018. Really good technical work again. And we did that same keyword search for justice, and it came up once in a definition of social and intergenerational justice. Now, we do later in that plan have a section about vulnerable communities, but we use really careful words like diversity, and it was really more about how we message and how we communicate, not how we involve and how we empower. So taking a step back, we had to finally acknowledge that what we had really been mapping all along was systemic injustice and racism in the city of Columbus. And we had to accept that if we didn't tackle racism and promote distributive and procedural justice in Columbus, our sustainability programs would fail. So we went back to our partners, internal and external, when I took over sustainability in December of last year. And we went through a SWOT analysis program, a really deep dive with non-traditional partners in the community to understand their view of the work we had done, and more importantly, their view of the work that should have been done. And then we relaunched Sustainable Columbus with a renewed vision and values. Like a lot of you, we have carbon neutral by 2050. or some other carbon reduction. For us, that's community-wide. We have more aspirational goals for carbon reductions by 2030. But most importantly, we said very loud and clear, internal and external, that it didn't matter where we ended up if we didn't get there in the right place. And that meant tackling environmental racism and promoting environmental justice, both procedural and distributive. So we tried to think about some new ways that we could use data and new ways that we could embed mapping in the work that we're doing. So one of the first things that we're doing, thanks to some national partner funding, is an opportunity neighborhood survey. So opportunity neighborhoods are those places where we see a cluster of all the quality of life challenges and the legacy of segregation and the presence of systemic racism here in the city of Columbus. We want to go out and talk in an authentic way with people in the community about what really matters to them when we're thinking about sustainability, about the environment, and about climate change. Are we actually solving the problems that they need us to solve? Are we asking the questions that they need us to ask? We're trying to bring in non-traditional partners to join us from the ground up so that we're asking the right questions. That means reaching out to groups that have frankly never been engaged in the environmental space here in Columbus, but have an outsized influence and presence in the communities where we really need to make a difference. We're looking at aligning programs in the city, getting away from the idea of what is a traditionally environmental or sustainability program, and making sure that these principles of tackling environmental racism, promoting environmental justice, are embedded in things like a zoning code update, or embedded in affordable housing. That these are things that are part and parcel of the way that we think about policy generally. And we're also trying to think through what a nuanced approach to mapping could be. There is a place and a desperate need for objective scientific data, but we also can't discount the lived experience of people in our community. And we have to find a way to better incorporate that into the questions that we're asking and the data that we're using. So this is kind of the outgrowth of everything I just talked about. These are the opportunity neighborhoods in the city of Columbus. And rather than beginning with a random data set and thinking about urban heat island effect or something else, we begin with the neighborhood that needs our help the most. And then we build out environmental programming from there. The first time that we did that was thanks to Greenlink, and I think Matt is on the call and just a fantastic partner to work with there. We began with these opportunity neighborhoods and asked ourselves, how can we change the energy burden there? What are the interventions that we could have in those neighborhoods that have a measurable difference for climate change, but maybe even more importantly, have a measurable difference for quality of life? And that led to, thankfully, my final slide. That is a three-pronged approach to energy efficiency in the city of Columbus. All of this based directly in opportunity neighborhoods, all of it directly informed by equity and tackling environmental racism, promoting environmental justice. We are looking at doing a best of the best demo homes program in Columbus. We would identify 5 homes where we would look at existing social service programs to recruit the folks that we'd be helping. So programs like Sojourn, that is a single female head of household program that looks to create financial independence over the course of 6 months. Celebrate One, which is seeking to dramatically decrease the infant mortality rate among people in Columbus generally, but especially among Black mothers who have a disproportionately high level of infant mortality. We want to do a deep energy retrofit for each of those homes, install solar on it, bring wraparound social services so that we're treating the whole person, family, and neighborhood, and really show what happens when all of Columbus is aligned in supporting a family. Secondly, we want to dramatically expand weatherization opportunities because the data showed us that that was one of the best investments we could make. Simple things like changing out every LED light in the home, doing whole home insulation. So we're looking at gap funding so that we can go beyond the federal poverty limit and get up to 250% of the federal poverty limit in our weatherization. Also looking at things that are not currently covered by weatherization, but provide a measurable impact on quality of life. So replacing old window AC units, replacing outdated refrigerators and washers and dryers, the things that our community has asked for and that we haven't provided before. And then lastly, make sure that we have a ripple effect in everything that we do. So we're creating a workforce program so that people in the neighborhoods that we're serving are also the ones that are doing outreach for energy savers and energy advocates. They're the ones doing a NEAT audit for these homes. They have an opportunity to work on home weatherization. So our goal would be to take youth 18 to 24 through a 20-week program where they work full-time. They're paid $17 an hour for that work. They're given any remedial training that they need, additional soft skills, and at the end of that program, we want them on a job site or in a apprenticeship program. And that's going to begin in Q2 of next year. So with that, I'm going to see if I can't stop sharing. There we go. I think we're good.
Wow, awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. That was really impressive to see and really exciting stuff coming up. I just want to jump right into these questions that you've posed that you are ready to pose, and I'm going to put them in the chat. But this first one, maybe you could just kind of share what would be helpful to hear from the group that you've been thinking about as you work through this great work.
Right. So I appreciate that. You know, one of the things that we've really struggled with is how we ground truth our data, right? So we have a phenomenal GIS department in the city of Columbus.